Hey everyone, this is Jack Bourne. I'm the founder of Deadline Funnel, and I've got a really special guest here today. Longtime friend of mine, guy that I've been kept in touch with for many, many years, a guy named Alex Nghiem. We'll say hi to Alex in just a sec, but let me give you a little bit of background. So when I was working with Perry Marshall as his marketing manager, because I was high up in Perry's organization, I actually constructed the marketing campaigns for most of what Perry put out. Perry went to some very high-level masterminds, and one in particular, there were about 6 or 7 people that would show up about 3 times a year in different locations across the country, and these were some really, really sharp marketers. One of those was Alex, and before I came to that first meeting, I had not heard of Alex, but I quickly realized from his introduction and some of the stories that he was telling in his list of clients that Alex and his business partner at the time were were running launches and had run launches for some of the biggest launches around, not just in the internet marketing space, but also quite a bit in the real estate space. And so whenever the topic of launches came up, everyone at the table, these very seasoned marketers, would turn to Alex and say, Alex, what's the deal? What do you think? And so I wanted to bring Alex into this because even though Alex is not currently actively, he doesn't like to consider himself a launch manager anymore. He's on to lots of different various things. But having done this for many, many years and seeing the behind the scenes, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, I thought it'd be really great to ask Alex and for you to hear it from him, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between about launches, because there's a lot of, when people talk about launches, a lot of times you just hear the positives. And I want to give a balanced approach to this. So Alex, thanks for joining me on this call.
Hey, it's a pleasure, Jack. And I'm actually thinking back how long we've known each other. It's probably been going on 10 plus years now, I think.
Yeah, it has. It's been a
Man,
while.
time flies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh?
So I bumped into you at the MFA event put on
Yep.
by Todd Brown, and I said, hey, would you be willing to share some of your relevant experience? Why don't we start with just a quick thumbnail sketch of just give us the quick thumbnail version of why someone should believe that you know what you're talking about with launches.
Sure. So as you mentioned briefly, yeah. So we ran, I believe up to now maybe probably between 18 and 20, somewhere in that number. And more than half of them were over 7 figures. In fact, one of the launches we did over 7 figures per month. It was a continuity program, and some of our clients literally went from maybe a local player to a national player, using the launch model. I believe at the time we had either the first or second launch agency. I don't want to basically remotely misrepresent saying we came up with that model, but we basically were the only agency around that ran 7-figure launches. That was our positioning, and that's what people seek us out for. So we told people, if you're running a $50,000, $100,000 launches, there's probably things that are fine. But if you're talking about multi-million dollar launches, the dynamics and the economics dynamics and the complexity goes up, not linearly. I came from running, multi-million dollar software projects, and there's a lot of parallels between running a launch and software projects. And my partner at the time, as you mentioned, he came from a background running, very large scale, projects in corporate America, $50 million plus budgets. And so when clients would come to us and say, well, how do we know you guys are doing? Say, well, with all due respect, this is not on the high end of what we ran, before. And so that's, that created a lot of reassurance. That's how, and so a lot of the stuff that people are seeing now, we actually pioneered 10, 12 years ago. Like the idea of using webinars and live stream and all that as part of launches. We were doing that way, way back, and we still do that today, in a modified format based upon the, what's happening right now in the marketplace.
So I want to start with, okay, and by the way, I'm not going to go into too much detail about here's all the wonderful things about launches. You mentioned one of them, which I'll just touch on real quickly, and that was that it can generate lots of visibility for someone who's
right.
unknown. However, since everyone else talks about like all the great things about launches,
Sure.
I wanted to focus on the other side of things, not to bash launches, but just to give a realistic idea.
Right.
So, with that context, let's demystify the vanity metrics that sometimes people throw out. Like, hey, we did a $2 million launch. So behind the scenes, what is actually going on?
Sure. So before I break down the number, I just want to kind of share with you my philosophy, right? We tell everybody right up front that a launch is a massive customer grab. It's rarely, if ever, a profit center. And if our clients, didn't get that or didn't subscribe to that, we pass on working with them. Exactly the reason you're talking about. The money's in the back end, right? So I'll use a very specific, so we'll look at a number here. We'll break down, right? So line item. If you're listening to this, you may want to grab a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, or maybe a spreadsheet, whatever you want to use to track the numbers, right? So let's use a launch that's doing. Let's be conservative, right? But basically, by the way, these numbers scale up roughly the same. So most folks, I would say, $1 million launch is a pretty significant milestone, even today. So if a launch, let's say, does about between $1 million and $1.2 million, right? One of the things that you have to realize that during a launch, there's an intense amount of pressure because of the scarcity, right? There's nothing more that uses scarcity more than a launch. I know many clients, and I have colleagues that use literally a launch as like, okay, look, this is the only time it's ever open all year, right? So everybody rushes in. But because then you get into what's called the bonus war, right? Where people, the affiliates, then bonus on top of that. So what happens, a lot of people buy because of the intensity and the euphoria and, all the excitement. But then once the ether wears off, once the excitement wears off, the refund rate, kicks in. So I've been on launches where, it's not uncommon where the refund rate is twice or some 3 times this. In fact, one of the things that a lot of, after the first launch, we realized that the customer, not only does the refund rate goes up, the staffing goes up too, because you have to hire additional customer service, or you basically you ask them to work a lot longer hours because there's just an intense amount of, number of clients flying in, right? So figure that refund rate 20-30% is common. And by the way, most people say, oh no, that's not happened. My product's so great. Yes, your product may be phenomenal. In fact, we only launched stuff that had really, really high marketability and also had really good track record. However, because the affiliates are out there, they're kind of driven by a set of conflicting dynamics, right? They want to promote the thing and win the thing, and you wanted to do that. And so what happens is they start bonusing the stuff, and they start there's just a lot of it, there's a lot of scarcity, driven. So we'll leave it at that. If you want me to go forward, I can. Yeah. So.
Actually, I want to I want to actually talk about the bonus war that you mentioned. I haven't heard you call it that before, but I mean that's I've seen leaderboards where the top prize is a car, or you've probably seen.
Oh yeah, well there's two bonus wars going on, right? And again, we're trying to show you the underbelly of this. So behind the scene, what happens is the affiliates are incentivized. There's usually 2 types of there's many contests, right? But there's usually 2 types of contests. One is the opt-in contest, and then one is what's called the winner, the winner of the overall launch contest, right? It's not uncommon for these large launches to have, I lost track of how many Harley Davidsons we gave away. I'm not kidding you. I think we over the lifetime of that launch agency, I think we facilitated, or we basically put together over $2.5 million worth of prizes between the Harley Davidson, the war, so there's a lot of incentives behind, and again, it's a sales contest, right? Let's call it what it is. And so, and the product owner just wants to reward their top performers. And so the affiliates, if you notice, right, it's very rare. In fact, I only know one launch. I studied hundreds of these things, right? I ran about, several dozen. I've advised on probably another 2 dozen, and I've studied hundreds of these things. But I only know one launch where it was the launch owner specifically said you're not allowed to add bonuses in. And in fact, you would disqualify yourself as an affiliate if you were to add any bonuses, because they wanted the product to sell on its own merit. However, that never happens any other launch I've seen. So when I talk about the bonus war, what's happening is the affiliates are basically piling out a lot of bonuses to win that, because behind the scene there's other prizes beyond the commission. So I don't want to basically paint any evil pictures. I'm just telling you you and the listeners, the dynamics, right?
If there's and beyond that, I know that there's some winning those contests or ranking.
Right. Yeah, okay.
Has other benefits. Why don't you talk?
Right. Sure. So there's also a slightly, not often talked about dynamic, which is the reciprocation, right? So in other words, it wasn't uncommon that if you win. By the way, since we're listening, I'm not acting as a whistleblower here, right? We still run launches, under certain conditions. So I don't want people to say, oh, well, this guy's left the industry. Now he's talking about something that, look, I'm just giving a fairly objective view here. So having said that, the idea is that it's a very common dynamic that if you're basically, this is why you see this, kind of little carousel, right? If you're basically usually the top 5, in some cases the top 10 affiliate, then what would happen is contractually the product owners is obligated to reciprocate. That's actually a big reason why a lot of the affiliates, even over the cars and all that other fun stuff, that's the big reason why the affiliates really go all out to win that, because then they know that then they have, a certain amount of promotion scheduled for the next 6 to 12 months.
Right. And the other, so there, I thought you were going to go in another direction. That's a great one. But the other one is that there's a bit of an ego war.
Oh yeah, very much so. Bragging rights and all of that. That's another reason why people, right? Yeah. So, but let me take it back to the numbers here, right? So that's one of the reasons why you see such intense promotion, right? So you have refund about, let's just say 20%. Okay, so let's use a million here, just so for round numbers, right? So you have a refund of 20%. That's $200,000. So down $800,000. Affiliates, it's quite common to pay 50%. Okay, so that's 20% and 50%. That's 70%. So you're down $300,000. A good JV manager would charge you 10% minimum. Okay, so that's $100,000 right there, right? Unless you already are such a superstar that you don't need an affiliate manager. That's unlikely, okay? And by the way, these numbers I'm looking at here, I want to make a distinction just so, if you're doing the math, okay? There's a distinction to a JV broker and a JV manager. The JV broker acts as like a rainmaker and a person that's recruiting the affiliates on your behalf. The JV manager acts more as like somebody that's basically more like a quasi-project manager. There's a launch manager, which I'll get to in a minute too. So when you add those two up, it's not uncommon for that combined amount to be 15 to 20%. So we use 15%, okay, that's kind of like a round number, right? Mm-hmm. So you got 20% going to refunds, 50% going to affiliate, 15% going to affiliate manager / JV broker. You're now, let's see, that's 75%, is that right? 85% of the money.
Well, let me ask you this. So you did 20%, 20 to 30% refunds, which I totally agree with. But wouldn't the affiliate commission be a 50% of the net, or is it? It's
50% of the gross. But sometimes what will happen is, depending on who you are, some folks will adjust the refund, others will eat it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So let's be conservative and so let's just drop the affiliate down just to adjust it. Let's just call it 40% of the overall gross. Okay. So $1 million, 20% of refund is 800,000, 40% to the affiliate. So now we're down to like maybe 60% is 400,000, right? Another say 15% of the original one's 150. We're down to about maybe around the 200, 250 range, right? Again, at $1 million launch, you better set aside around 100,000 in prizes. Otherwise, your affiliate is gonna. I literally had an affiliate tell me like, your prizes suck. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Your prizes suck. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, your number one prize, it sucks. And I'm just like dumbfounded, like, really? And then ever since then, that's now, if you ever had a chance to look behind the board, anybody's been an affiliate, super affiliate, they know what I'm talking about. So figure 100,000 to that, right? So by the time the dust settles, it's not uncommon to basically have maybe 10 or 15% net. And that is if you're doing every damn thing right. If the launch goes sideways in any fashion, I've watched more than one company, how do I put this, be diplomatic, go sideways, or in some cases go massively upside down, in some cases never recover. Because it's like a movie premiere. That's what I tell people, look, this is a movie premiere, okay? And if you ever watch a movie premiere basically not open strong, the movie's over. You can't prop it up after that. So this is very high risk stakes you're playing here. And again, we're not talking about the emotional cost on the team, because you're working. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, okay? Anybody that tells you otherwise, that, oh, we have a process, call out on it, all right? When we were running launches, it wasn't uncommon to work 12, 15-hour days for long, long periods. And everybody keeps saying, well, that's because, no. Look, I'm a systems guy. I know process. I know you know processes as well, Jack. But you're taking the equivalent, like roughly a year or 2 years worth of work. You're trying to cram it down to 3 to 6 months. I don't care how efficient you are. There's just an insane amount of work, and that assumes you have a built-out team.
Well, and let me ask this. So I want to be clear. So it's a lot of work for you, the launch agency.
Oh no. We tell the client the same thing too. In fact, one of my clients told me this afterwards. Said, I wish you guys had told me, right? Because we told them. I said, I know you guys told us, but I didn't realize what you guys really meant. And so we did a post launch interview, right? He said, I said, what are lessons learned? Because we want them to share, right? Because we have obviously our perspectives. Like, so anybody's doing a launch, I would basically advise them to go have a conversation with their loved ones that for the next several months that they may not see much of me. And in fact, I actually published an interview years ago, and I actually had folks that were contemplating a launch, and when they heard that, said the cost is too high. Not the financial cost, but the emotional, financial, and the familial cost is too high. Because you literally are not going to be that available. And everybody says, I'm going to take weekends off. Pretty much consider weekends and not long nights a given. There's just so much that has to happen. And by the way, just so, and this is one of the reasons I love, what you have going, Jack. Most of the launches out there, they're throwaways. Meaning that it's very tough to reuse a lot of it the next time.
Why is that?
Because what happens is, it's like a lot of the launches, a lot of what happens is the recency of it, right? So if you actually follow some folks, there's two schools of thought, right? There's one that says, well, basically have it all done ahead of time, then basically release it. And then there's the other one, which is like, well, you actually engage with the audience, right? So what tends to happen is with a launch, at that scale, what typically happens, there's usually a theme that's tied together, kind of like some thing that's relatively current that's going on in the marketplace. And so for it to really have all the effects that it has, it's usually somewhat, timely, for lack of a better word. And so it just, very few people actually reuse a lot of the assets. Yeah. And by the way,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And by the way, one thing I forgot to mention in this is also that we didn't even put in this, folks, is just the video, the cost of the production video, whatever. I tell people this, and again, I don't like to sugarcoat because it's a very large investment. I said, look, if you're scared of a $30,000 to $50,000 bill for the video, then you're not ready for this. And by the way, that wasn't our fee. That's the crew. That's the video crew and everything. Because what's happening is in a traditional style launch, it's now getting to the point where a lot of people, because when you're doing a launch of this type, it's really a big bang thing. You want to grab everybody's attention right for it to work, right? Which is one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of what I call a big bang launch. I prefer much more of a rolling or basically evergreen launch, which is, the whole point of what you have, right? Because when you try to make a splash like that, you don't have the luxury of doing, well, I think I'll go subpar in the video. You just completely torch the launch at that point. So as a launch agency, we never said, no, you have to go spend $30,000, $50,000 on the video. What we were telling them is like, that's the reality. If you want to make a big splash, that's what it takes. So we were like, my point is that we weren't doing that because we had a vested interest in making money on the video production. We never got involved in the video production. We would manage it. We would help script it. But the video is something they had to do, obviously, because, not a lot of our clients weren't necessarily in our same country, same city or even state at times. So that's the other thing that a lot of folks, overlook is, they get this giant bill for the video. Anyway.
So speaking of bills, what is typical for someone, for an entrepreneur to spend before cart open? Because there's a lot of build out before.
Oh yeah.
So what is someone looking at?
Conservatively about 150. Conservatively.
Okay.
Yeah, because when you have to, so let's kind of map out what that looks like, right? So if you want to hire like a high, okay, so here's some of the key roles, okay? And by the way, as you pointed out, Jack, a lot of people go back to read, I just had a call the other day with somebody, right? They're literally, they heard it through a grapevine. I've done it before. Say, oh my God, am I doing something wrong? There's so much work. It's like, no, the fact you haven't jumped off, the fact you haven't, the fact you're still staying is a testament to that because you're 5% short. They thought they could do this 2 people. They said, no, you have a copywriter. Figure a good copywriter is 30, 50 grand. Unless you're like really, really great at copy, you want to hire a high-end copywriter, right? A launch team. This includes a project manager, a launch architect. Now, what's the difference? A project manager is the one that runs the timeline, make sure everybody's doing everything on time. And this is not a small team. Usually on the low end, 8 to 10 people, on the high end, about 15 plus people. Not all full time, but there's different roles, right? So the project manager, the launch architect is usually the one that basically architects the launch, right? They work with the copywriter to figure out what's the theme, what's the angle, what's the lead magnet, all of that. Because there's a lot of nuances with a launch that a project manager may not be familiar with, right? The graphic designers, okay? So at this point, figure that alone is 100 to 150,000. Doesn't include the copy yet, right? So if you want to be more pragmatic, let's be on the low end. Copywriter, 30 grand. The launch team, let's just say 125 to go middle of the road. Okay, so you're now up to $155,000. Video, very common for 30, 50,000. So my number 150 was actually on the low end. You're probably looking at today's time more like 200,000. And like you said, this is upfront.
So I know there's going to be quite a few people listening to this and saying, well, this is really interesting, but I'm not personally going to be doing a 7-figure launch. I want to start with like I'd be happy with a $200,000 launch or a $100,000 launch. So I know that you didn't personally do a whole lot of those, but I know that, you're in the, and you were in the, or you still are, you're in the industry. Some of these costs are still going to be, is it going to be just,
it doesn't go down. It doesn't go downward that much. Like the video fees, unless you're willing to just go with a lower. Now, again, at some point, it's not economical to do that, right? So if you're doing more like $100,000 launches, the videos are probably going to run more like 5 to 15. Because I talked to somebody the other day, they ran an $80,000 launch and their video fees was 12 grand, 12 or 15,000. Mm-hmm. What's the math on that? Let's just say it's 12,000 over 80,000. That's what, 17% of the overall budget, right? Just on the video. And I asked them, who did you copyright? I did. I said, so what was that like? So it sucked. Because they have to do the product and do the copy because they can afford a copywriter. So that's where it gets really so that creates a different form of stress because now you're trying to wear 18 hats because you can't afford all the fees. Because right. Even a decent copywriter, it's going to cost 10, 15,000.
Yeah, because it's not just the website copy; it's the email.
Oh yeah!
Copy.
Oh my God! The amount of email copy. Here's the other thing a lot of people don't realize, right? Just the unbelievable amount of email copy there is. Okay, and this, by the way, it's not the full blown. I'm just giving you a tip of the iceberg. Okay, you have all the emails for the launch, right? Okay, for like to promote the product. Then you got all the emails to keep the affiliates engaged, okay? Mm-hmm. And then here's the part that will really blow people's mind. You will spend tens of thousands of dollars on a copy, or unless you're willing to put in hundreds of hours yourself. And by the way, that's not an exaggeration, okay? If you think I'm based off my, like, oh my God, he's crazy. It's going to take 10, 20. No. If you don't have a couple hundred hours to set aside to write this copy, you're not preparing properly, okay? So let's just assume it's 80. My experience has been 80 to 100 hours. How do I know this? Because we hired professional copywriters and even they were overwhelmed. I had to step in and backfill some of the copy because they were overwhelmed with a professional copywriter, okay? So that's how I know how many hours it takes. So that aside, you got the email for the product. You got the email for basically the affiliates to mail to their list, right? And then you also have the email to then actually engage affiliates so they continue mailing. If you think that the affiliates say, oh, hey, I'm on board and they're going to do everything to do possible to mail, no. You don't understand affiliate psychology. Many of them will mail as minimal as possible. And then you have to basically have an email thread going on the affiliate and pumping them up. That's sometimes there's 2 or 3 emails a day, right? Then here's the other part that'll blow your mind. There's basically the email you will give to the, for lack of a better word, maybe, again, at the risk of stepping on some toes, what are called B affiliates. Okay, this is lingo, by the way. This is all industry lingo, okay, behind the scene. B affiliates, meaning they're not the big players, right? They're good, but they're not like the big dogs, right? The big dogs, 1 or 2 things will happen. They'll take your email and say, looks good, but that thing I'll write my own. You just spent $10,000 on this email. They're not even going to use it. Great. Or the other thing happens like, well, we don't want to use the generic email because we're going to sound everybody else. You need to create customized email for me. I'm sorry, excuse me? Yeah. So now you have a choice, right? Say, well, this person could probably drive 10, 15% of your sales. And by the way, I've seen cases where the top 3 affiliates drive, a good portion of the sales. So you have a choice. You said if you're an affiliate, you would do the same thing, right, Jack? You don't want to be sent out the same email like the other 20, 30 affiliates, right?
Yeah, I mean, just case in point, Perry usually more like 19 out of 20 launch opportunities. He just didn't do it because, and his reason was,
right.
Like number one, I don't, we don't have a relationship. But number 2, even if we do, I don't want to sound like 15 other people. Like that was his, and I'm not saying good or bad.
Right.
I'm just saying that was his philosophy. But I have seen lots and lots of times when other people wanted to promote Perry stuff, Like they
Right.
wanted their own custom email. They didn't want to sound like the other person
Exactly.
landing in the same inbox, because how does it look when I'm opening up my inbox and I've got 3 emails promoting the same launch? I mean, that's kind of okay, because that's kind of what you want. You want buzz. But if
Right.
all the emails are basically the same except who
Mhm.
the sender is, it doesn't look good.
Right. And of course, you're the product owner, right? Are you going to go to like, who you think are your top affiliates? Say, well, why didn't you take on the 5, 10,000 right to the email copy? Like, are you insane?
Right.
Right. So guess what? So the copywriting alone, that's where that number 30, 50,000 comes from. And on a small launch, even that number's not that much lower. You can't really get it done for under 10 to 20,000. Right. So there's certain costs you can reduce based upon like the number of dollars you're willing to do. But actually at a certain point, it does become economical to do when you're doing these kind of launches, right? When you get a bunch of people together. Now, the evergreen model is very different, which we'll talk about, right? Because you have different dynamics going on there. So,
Well, and maybe that's a good time to compare. So one of the things, so you tell me this, what was your experience with regards to any sort of A/B testing? Because I know that, I mean, A/B testing is tried and true for, evergreen, businesses that are getting clients day after day after day.
mm-hmm.
With more of an evergreen model, you look for things that are going to give your copy a lift, your sales a lift. But with a launch, everything's compressed into a
Oh yeah, you have no. That's the other side. I'm glad you brought it up. With a launch, you don't have the luxury of doing A/B testing because it only lasts for a week.
or anything that you learn, you have to wait until the next launch.
Right. Basically, yeah. So you have to be, that's why, there's just so many. Now, what we do is we manage the risk. Okay, so it's not like, oh my God, like, we're shooting for the moon. We basically don't have any, we distributed things so that way it's not all on the sales letter. That's what we do is we do webinars, right? We customize webinars for super affiliates. We do live streams. I think, as far as I know, we were the first people to do live stream. To give you a sense how long ago this was, we did a live stream. Back then, we were charging per minute per attendee. We did a live stream. It was like 3-4 hours. The bill was $9,000. Mm-hmm. Now it's almost, it's almost free, right? Facebook Live. But to give you a sense of like how long ago, some of the stuff that people are doing now that we've done ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So there are ways to manage, to balance that risk. So it's not all okay. We open and then crickets or whatever. So we don't just open the thing and cross our finger and hope it works out. But like you said, because it's not like you could isolate the thing and said, hey, we're doing it this way. Now, one of the terms I believe we came up with is this concept called a rolling launch, which is we would tell people, like, let's not do a full-blown, all-out, assault, right? Let's do a very controlled launch first to make sure the offer works out, okay? And so we do stage it that way, but that only defers, this for so long. You still couldn't do the kind of testing you could do with evergreen launch, where you actually very, very controlled data and you can kind of scale up or down, right, depending on what's happening. With a launch, it was pretty much all or nothing proposition because it's just the nature of the beast.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned this before, but I didn't want to interrupt your. Mm-hmm. So way back in our beginning of the conversation, you were talking about staffing resources and how. Mm-hmm. I mean, just imagine if you've got this. If you're launching a new product and mm-hmm. you've done everything that we've talked about, you've spent mm-hmm. the 3 to 6 months, et cetera, you've spent mm-hmm. the money, but all of a sudden you've got a flood of new clients expecting service, having questions need to be answered. I mean, you've got to basically staff up really quick.
Oh, very, very fast. Yeah, that's actually the very first launch we did. We were so naive, because at the time, that's what happened. I mean, basically they had the flood. I think that launch did 3,200. What was the number? No, I'm sorry. That one did 1,800. Yeah, 1,800 new customers. Guess what? Your customer service is not used to that, right? Mm-hmm. Even you have basically, Kaiko or whatever, it's called these days, like those, web-based, trouble support ticket system. If you have a phone number, you're going to get calls. And by the way, a lot of the calls you're going to get, it's not about your product. Because remember, when the person is buying it, they can't differentiate between you and the affiliate. So guess what you just took on? Being customer service, for your affiliates. A lot of the calls are like, well, when I get bonus X, Y, and Z? Mm-hmm. But that's not even our product. But yeah, but aren't they part of your staff? How do you explain to buyers that, well, no, they're you can't, right? So you got to coordinate with the affiliate and say, well, this person's looking for the bonus. Can you take care of it? Because a lot of times they bought because of the bonus. Because they didn't have a relationship with the product owner, they had a relationship with the affiliate.
Right. Hmm? So I know that you you used to tell us that if you're going to do a launch, you need to have a plan of like what's going to come next. So
Right.
I know that one of the things that you used to teach clients to do, or strongly suggest, would be that they do a live event, and
Mhm.
there'd be some pretty large something to be pitched at the event.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
order to make up, I mean, in order to
yeah.
make up for, you've got all these people coming to this event,
Mhm.
you didn't make, percentage wise, you didn't make very much on the launch, if
Right,
anything.
net wise, right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what are some other things that you saw clients do to make up for the economics of the launch?
Sure. So again, as I mentioned, like, near the beginning of the call, what we philosophically, we tell our client and how we practice this at the launch is it's a very wonderful way of grabbing a lot of customers. There's a lot of breakage and whatnot, but that's what happens when you scale quickly. Um, and But then unless you have a back end, economic doesn't make sense, as you alluded to, right? So I'll give you an extreme version, and then why on the surface, like, what in the world were they thinking? We had a client, not a, didn't have as much pull with some of the bigger affiliates, so they wanted to give them a higher, a much more generous commission. I think they gave them 70% on $1,000 product. So you can see where the math is going, right? Okay, well, this guy sounds like he's suicidal, right? So I think the net on that, I think, was like maybe 3% on a $1.1 million launch. You're like, God, the guy must have been completely delusional. However, the full story is that if you just look at the launch economically, it didn't make sense. But then within 6 months of that, we showed him how to put together an event with a very large backend. In his case, between 10,000 and I think his backend was like 10 or 15. 10, he had one at 10,000, one at 15,000. He had all of these people that are now buyers, and then by basically putting them through this process, basically 2 live events, offering these programs. To make a long story short, he went from a local player to a national player in about a span of 10 months. In fact, that was one of the biggest benefits that he told us later. He went from somebody that's relatively unknown to a major player. But to make to your point, the 2 live events that he basically put the buyers through, and because he had a really really solid process converting them, he made 900 some thousand, and the gross profit. I was like, because a lot of the costs are already absorbed by the launch, he kept most of that in house.
By the way, that brings up a question in my mind. How did you see things structured in terms of affiliate commission with back-end sales? In other words,
Great
if
question. Great
yeah,
question. Mm-hmm. So there's no universal.
mm-hmm,
Okay, it's more common. It's more common than not to not pay the back end
mm-hmm,
unless it's an immediate upsell, right? If there's an immediate sale, then
sure,
usually there's expectation. On the back end, most of the time, there was not expectation to pay that. Now, having said that, we did have a couple clients that, again, that want to incentivize the affiliates more. They would pay them a small amount, usually maybe 3, no more than 5%.
right.
Mm-hmm. And so that was a way to differentiate yourself, from, because you have to remember the affiliates, especially their high profile affiliate, they get approached a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my mantra that I've been putting out into the marketplace is, look, you should really strive towards a business model where you launch when it's right for you, when
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense
Right,
for you, not
right.
because you have to, because there's a lot of people out there that are just going, the ups and downs. I call it the launch revenue roller coaster.
Oh, yes.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, quarter one is huge, and then quarter two you're eating ramen noodles type of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So can you talk about your philosophy on that?
Yeah. So it's funny. I, the book is not available anymore, but I wrote the very first book on launches. And in that term, I talked about like get off the gravy train and basically build out. And, at the time, this was years ago, like, and the technology that exists back then, shortly after that, Rich Efron basically came out with the whole evergreen thing. So, but the points that I talk about in there said, take the money you made and invest in the paid traffic, basically diversify away from this, because it's not a business model, but it's so seductive, right? I used to call it crack, because people would get addicted to it. They're like, we just did this, let's do it again. I'm like, you can't do it again. First off, everybody's exhausted, right? That's one. But two, your affiliate have been pushing this like crazy for you for the last 2 to 4 weeks. They're not going to mail for you again for another good, 6 to 12 months. Usually more like 9 to 12 months. And say, huh. So what I'm going to do is say, build an evergreen version of this. That sounds like a lot of work. I don't like that. And guess what happened? Like you said, you have this giant peak, right? And they think that's going to last forever. And because there wasn't a willingness to build out that infrastructure to make this evergreen, the business then basically slowly kind of slid downwards. And so that's why these things tend to, that's why you tend to see spikes in this thing, or people come out. You almost equate like kind of like a comet, right? Or sometime in Hollywood, somebody will make a big splash, and then then they're not around. So
right, or in the music industry, the one
oh yeah, the
one
hit wonder.
wonder.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, the healthy model that I've seen is where the core base of what you've got is you've got an evergreen model. You can do A/B split testing.
Oh
You
yes.
find different things, and you're going to try a lot of stuff that doesn't work, but you're going to find some things that work, and you're going to improve and improve and improve.
Right.
And then when it makes sense for you, when it's right for you and you're doing it for various reasons, yeah, go do that launch, whether it's an internal launch or the type of launch that you were talking about.
Right.
But
yeah,
but that bumps everything, that raises the water level for an existing healthy, client intake funnel. And you already have, just imagine this. I mean, if you have that evergreen system, you have some staff on board. It's not like one of those, the picture in my mind is either the desert wasteland with the tumbleweed or the office with where the boiler room was, but like the feds came and like now there's nothing in the room, but you're not going from like basically ghost town to gosh, we need 200 people in here now to handle all this.
Yeah, it's very much a feast or famine thing. And like I said, I think it's a great model as long as you understand. And I think this is I think there's too much, like you said, euphoria around it. Does it work? Of course, but you need to know, like you said, which that's one reason why I think we're such good friends, and we have such enormous professional respect for each other. There's a balanced view that, quite honestly, a lot of people don't talk about.
Right.
Like I said, I tell people right out the front, if you don't have a back end, you shouldn't launch. End of story. For the kind of launch we're talking about here. Now, if you do incrementally, that's different. But for these kind of big style launches, which everybody loves bragging about, those vanity metrics, if you don't have a back end, you pretty much have no net or very little net, right? So, and of course, you can't, like you said, you can't grow a business based on growth, right? You want to make sure you honor everybody's commitment, whatever. And at the end of the day, as a business owner, you got to deal with what's left so you continue to grow the business. Yeah. Like you said, the combination is really cool. So
yeah, you cannot take either opt-ins or gross revenue to the bank. Hey, Alex, great conversation. If you've got anything that we feel that you feel that we missed, you can add it in now. But also, I want to give you the opportunity, if you want to tell people what you're up to now. Let them know.
Yeah, sure. So they can reach out to me on Facebook. My full name is Alex. Last name is spelled Nghiem. N as in Nancy, G as in Gary, H, I, E as in Edward, M as in Mary. And then Jack, I also mentioned I have a website that they can download a book that talks about this, about how to create big ticket programs. And that's at expertriches.com/book, expertriches.com/book. The reason I think that book will be of great interest to anybody listening to this is because, as we mentioned, one of the best ways to make sure that it launch, evergreen or live or, rolling, however you want to do it, one of the best way to create a massive ROI in your business is to have a back end. And a back end usually means a big ticket program. And so that book talks a lot about different types of back end programs, and then pros and cons of each one and which one is a fit for, your situation. So most folks usually default to a coaching program, but that may not always be the best, choice. For most folks it is, but I wanted to at least bring it to people's attention. There are other ways of doing big ticket program other than just doing a coaching program. So.
Very cool. All right. And that was expertriches.com/book. Right. So listen, Alex, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your extensive experience and expertise and wisdom, and really peeling back the curtain so that anyone looking to do a launch has at least all the information to be able to make a decision.
Yep. I enjoyed this conversation, Jack. It was a great pleasure sharing this with your community.